Oh, thank you. Yeah, I'm a bit messy today because I've been working from home, but hopefully you can relate to that a little bit. Cool. Okay, we are recording. Kia ora koutou. Before we get into this boot camp, this hui, I'd really like to start with my mihi. I did start off by saying that I'm British, so I hope my pronunciation is acceptable. Kei ngā maunga whakahi, ngā mihi mana hou kia koutou. No Ingarani, sorry, no Ingarani oku te puna, kei whanganui a tara a hau e noho ana, I tipu aki a hau ki Hamane, Paratiamu, a he tareiria me ruhia. No Rimataka tōku koroko Hori Williams, tu whitia te hopo, mai rangatia te angatu. Ko Alice Williams tōko ingoa, kei Xero a hau e mahi ana, no reira tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. So welcome to the Interview Skills Bootcamp hosted by the wonderful Summer of Tech and Yekti specifically today on the call, and also me, Alice. Thanks so much for joining me. I know it's a Monday evening, so wasn't sure how many people would actually turn up to this, so really appreciate you making the time. The session, like I just said, is being recorded and it will be made available afterwards. So if you do need to drop off, that's really cool. No worries at all. I'm not going to be taking your names down or putting a black mark against your name if you apply to us through Summer of Tech. Just drop off if you need to and you can catch up later. Okay, cool. If I can get my next slide to work. Awesome. So just a quick shout out to all of the amazing partners and sponsors of Summer of Tech. They play a huge role, obviously, in providing opportunities for all of you. And we do that every year. So we're really proud to be partnering with Summer of Tech. So just before we get into it, just wanted to tell you a little bit about me, your host, and before I get into the truly interesting stuff. So I'm Alice. As you can tell by my accent, I'm British. My pronouns are she, her. I was born in Germany though, and I do speak German pretty badly these days. But yeah, I only moved here about 2.5 years ago, but I am in fact part Kiwi. So I feel like I'm sort of coming home after a lifetime of living in lots of different countries with both of my parents in the military doing various different things. I absolutely love dogs. I know Yekti can relate to that. Yekti also has a cute dog. I don't actually have a dog. This is me borrowing a dog for the day. But yeah, big fan of dogs. And I think that is probably my spirit animal because I'm very food oriented and yeah, always up for a cuddle and a run around. I'm pretty scared of heights though, which is confusing because there's a picture of me climbing there, but I do like to overcome my fears by just being bloody minded and tackling them front on. So that's why I like to go climbing in my spare time. I really love nature and tramping as well, even though I'm pretty scared of bugs. So that's down at the bottom there. That's me hugging a tree on my first ever visit to New Zealand when I fell in love with it. And I'm generally signed up to some really ridiculous challenge that terrifies all of my family and friends. Like this is me lining up to do a half Ironman. So triathlon at the moment is kind of my thing. And I used to be, back in the day, bottom left there, I used to be a competitive but not very good rower, if I'm honest. Most of my friends ended up becoming Olympians. I definitely did not. And that's a photographic piece of evidence of me winning this one thing one time. So yeah, proud moment there, but that was like one of two moments where I actually won anything. And fun fact about me, I dyed my hair probably 20 times in the last year. Lockdown got me good and I joined the bleach hair gang and then went all the colors of the rainbow. Currently it's kind of pink. But yeah, I dyed it so much that I had to chop it all off because I ruined it. So yeah, if you leave me alone, I will probably end up dyeing my hair. I have all the different colors in pots in my bedroom cupboard, and if I'm even vaguely bored or distracted, that's probably what I'll end up doing of a weekend. So yeah, as I mentioned in my mihi, I'm based in Wellington, and but I'm originally from the UK and Germany. So please do comment in the chat to let us know where you're based right now, and also if you're from somewhere that isn't where you're based right now, would love to see that. So go ahead and pop it in the chat. That would be really cool, to see where everyone's from. Lots of Wellingtons coming through. Nice, nice, nice. Christchurch, cool. Oh, Malaysia, nice. Upper Hutt in South Africa. This is so cool. Oh, wonderful. Nice, nice, nice. Born in Canada. Oh, I love Canada. How lucky. Invercargill. I've never been. I really want to go. I'll need to ask you about it later. Cool. Okay. Keep commenting away if you like. I'm going to move on to the next bit because I'm going to leave this slide up here for a couple of minutes. So in terms of what I actually do here at Xero, I manage the junior talent programs basically. My role is graduate experience advisor, but what that means is I run all the recruitment and selection for junior talent. So that's both graduate and interns across our New Zealand offices. So we have two offices, Wellington and Auckland, where we take in graduates and interns. Previous to Xero, I was also hiring graduates and interns, but for Amazon in Europe and PwC up in Auckland. So yeah, I mean, in a nutshell, I'm super passionate about junior talent and helping people, if I can, who are in the midst of navigating a career change or the start of their careers. So that's why I really wanted to hopefully give you some helpful tips and tricks tonight about interviewing. So if you do want to connect with me on LinkedIn, this is my QR code, which is why I thought I'd pop it into a slide for you. You can either scan it right now when you go into LinkedIn and go to search someone. There's like a little QR like button that you can press, and you can either show someone your QR code or you can scan someone else's. So if you make sure that it's on the scanning function, you can scan this right now. Or if you don't want to do that right now and you do want to connect with me later, just pop my name down and I should come up pretty quickly in your search. Cool. Lovely stuff. So, right, some boring housekeeping, I'm afraid, but I've got to say it before we get into everything. So, if you can keep your mic off for the duration of sort of when I'm talking, that would be really cool. Just to reduce the the feedback and stuff like that. But do keep your camera on if you are comfortable doing so. There's no pressure to do that. It's just really nice to see your faces. That's all. It's kind of selfish. I just want to see everyone, but no need to do that if you don't want to. And like I said at the start, please do drop off if you want to. That's absolutely fine. You can also follow this conversation in the Summer of Tech career channel. So if you do have questions that you think of during this or after this, and you're happy for it to be answered after the session, because I obviously can't do both at the same time, just feel free to ask questions in that channel, and you can tag me in that as well, because I'm on the Summer of Tech Slack platform workspace. So if you've got questions during this and you want them to be answered during this session, here's how to do that. So if you look down, it should be at the bottom right hand side of your page. There should be a triangle, a square, and a circle button. So if you click on that, it takes you to the Q&A function. And basically, you can type in a question and other people can upvote that question if they also want that question answered. And then at the end of what I'm talking about this evening, we can then go through some of those most upvoted questions. And sorry, my microphone's gone funny. Hang on 1 second. Sorry. Sorry about that. Can everyone still hear me? Yekti, can you give me a thumbs up? Okay. Sorry, my laptop suddenly said I was about to lose battery. Oops. Okay, all good. That was a bit of a close call. Okay, yeah, so that's the housekeeping. But yeah, if you do have any questions, please pop them, about any of this housekeeping, pop it in the chat now and Yekti can answer you hopefully. Okay, now, so in terms of the agenda, um, here's what I'll be talking to you all about over the next sort of 45 minutes, maybe an hour or so. So, first of all, I'm going to talk to you about why we're here, talking about interview skills. And then I'll go into the different types of interviews that are potentially what you could be going through, either through Summer of Tech or just in the future in general. Then I'll give you some advice on how to prepare for various different interviews. I can't possibly go through all the different types and all the different ways, but I'll give you some of the most common and hopefully most helpful ways to prepare. And then some key do's and don'ts and a couple of couple of examples of things that I've seen which are definite don'ts. Um, but hopefully they're pretty commonsensical to you. And then, like I just said, we'll go into a Q&A session. Okay, so yeah, let's talk about why we're here. Everyone has to interview, whether we like it or not. It's not everyone's cup of tea. I totally get that. It will be a skill that you'll need not just for this summer, not just for this internship that you're hoping to get, not just for your grad role, but at various different points in your life. And it can feel really nerve-wracking for many people, myself included. But interviews are completely unavoidable and they can be a gateway to some really awesome opportunities. So I think the main thing here is to realize that we should learn about it, lean into it, and not be afraid of it. And hopefully it will get us where we want to go. They can also be a way of you to like figure out what you don't want to do, which I think is just as important as figuring out which jobs you do want to take or accept. I also kind of want to persuade you, hopefully, that interviews don't necessarily have to be torturous. Believe it or not, interviews are not designed to be something that where companies are trying to catch you out. Um, I know this sounds really corny, but I kind of think of interviewing as kind of similar to dating. um, so what I mean by that is, it's not just about a company trying to figure out if you're the one for them, but it's also about you trying to figure out if they're right for you. So do try and remember that if you're preparing for an interview or if you're feeling particularly nervous and you're thinking, oh, I really hope they like me, just try and remember actually, you know, sit back and relax a little bit and figure out if you like them too. That's just as important, if not more important at times. So once you start to think and prepare for interviews in this kind of way, it can be really helpful, especially when it comes to settling your nerves. And I want you to feel empowered as you enter an interview kind of setting, especially as you're starting out in your careers. And I personally, as an interviewer, I never want to grill the person that I'm interviewing. And the aim of an interview should not be for an interviewee like you to feel like you're being grilled. So hopefully with some of the tips and tricks that I give you, it will help you feel like an interview is more of a conversation where you're sort of showcasing all the great things about yourself, but also knowing how to ask the right questions to the interviewer to figure out if the company and that team could be a good fit for you. So in terms of preparation and coping strategies, I'm going to give you hopefully some helpful tips and tricks to prepare and also to cope with some different types of interviews that may come up this year, but also in the near future as well. So when you hear me say different types of interviews, you're probably thinking, what do you mean? What do you mean there are different types? It's probably making you feel a little bit more scared than maybe before you joined the call. But I just wanted to run through some really typical types of interviews that you'll probably see, especially at junior talent stage, when you're starting to apply to jobs. So some of this will be really obvious to some of you, but I'll just run through them in any case. So face-to-face interviews, they are exactly as they sound. This type of interview is generally hosted in person. It's either one-on-one or two-on-one, so two people from the company and you. And this type of interview can range really in terms of question style, but generally they're what we call competency-based questions, hypothetical questions. They could be a case study. It could be you showcasing a project. It could be a mixture of all of these things. So it's important to find out in advance, if you can, what style it's in. Competency-based questions, by the way, are questions where someone asks you, tell me about a time where you did X, Y, Z. So it's asking for examples of where you, or evidence where you've done a thing already. And hypothetical is, how would you react, or how do you think you would react to this type of situation? So it's asking not for evidence of you having done it, but how you think you would do it. With a panel interview, it's pretty similar generally to the face-to-face interview, but instead of it being one-on-one or two-on-one, it's normally with more people from the company sitting in front of you. Sometimes it's sort of 3 or 4 people, and they are generally from the team that you're interviewing for. So that's kind of generally what a panel would look like. And again, it could be any of those styles that I just mentioned to you, so like a case study or showcasing a project or competency-based questions and things like that. So again, try and find out in advance what style it will be in. Group interview is pretty common at grad stage. And this is when you and other candidates basically are all being assessed together via something like an activity or an exercise of some sort. And they're generally part of a wider interview day. So that then brings me on to assessment day. And an assessment day is also super typical with graduate or intern hiring. And this can vary heaps in terms of format, but it generally involves a series of like one-to-one or two-on-one interviews, and also things like group interviews, and maybe even a panel interview across a day. So for example, if you interview for the grad program at Xero, we run an assessment day. And in our assessment day, we call it a grad day. In that day, you would often go through 3 different types of interviews. So you would have, and it would be sort of over the course of a morning, so like 3 hours of interviews. And you would have, for example, a technical interview, which would be 2-on-1. You would have a soft skills interview where we sort of get to know you a bit more, and that would also be 2-on-1. And then there would be a group interview, which is generally a presentation where we give you a topic to go away and research for like 15 minutes. And then you come back and deliver a really short, like 2-minute presentation to the rest of the group and a panel of interviewers. And you all take it in turns to talk about your project, your topic. So that's sort of an example of an assessment day. That's how we do it here at Xero, but every company is pretty different, or just slightly different. And they tend to give you quite a lot of detail before they invite you to an event like that. So you should know exactly what to expect. Yeah. In terms of virtual interview, this is quite a generic term here because this can be any of the above interviews that I've just mentioned, but basically hosted online. So, for example, at Xero, we use Google Meet, which you're using, to watch me do this presentation right now. We tend to use that for all of our virtual interviews. But that is not every type of interview in existence. I'm aware of that. You might have phone interviews or phone screens. They're often used as a sort of a screening tool early on in the process when you're going through an application. But these are arguably, the ones that I've just spoken about, these are arguably the most common types, especially at junior talent level. Has anyone on the call been through a different interview style that I've not mentioned? If so, pop it in the chat because I'd be keen to know. These are the ones which I'm most familiar with, but there may be ones that are being used by other companies that I just don't know about. So If there are any, just mention them, and I'll be sure to look into them and improve my presentation for future talks. Cool. So that is quite a lot of different interview types, I know. I'll be giving you some advice on how to prepare in general for basically any of these interviews. And I'll also focus on the slight differences between preparing for a virtual interview and an in-person interview. Cool. So let's give you some advice on that. So before you even start to prepare, I think the best thing to do is to really sit down and have a think about why you're applying. Um, I'm aware that at graduate level, at least, it can be quite scary when you're looking for a grad role, and sometimes it feels like the best thing to do is to apply to all the things and play the numbers game. But I really do encourage you to think hard about why you're applying, and go about it in as smart a way as you can. So thinking about what genuinely motivates you, the reasons behind applying for a role or certain roles, will really help you focus in on that application, and it makes you more likely to actually be successful in getting it. That's not me saying that you have to be the perfect candidate for the role and you have to check everything off on the job description, but having a genuine motivation for it will be really nice, and will really help you, and you'll also get fewer rejections hopefully overall. So for many internships, companies don't really expect you to have heaps of experience, or be a subject matter expert in any kind of particular role. So that kind of adds a bit of emphasis to what I'm saying here. Motivations will be something that they really want to understand, and they will probably ask you about, maybe even more so than your technical knowledge at this stage. So, for example, here at Xero, if you apply to an internship in, say, cybersecurity, we will not expect you to have experience in cybersecurity. You may have studied, say, a security module or two at university or in a dev academy or something like that, but we're not really that fussed if you haven't had a lot of, especially not a lot of working experience. You might have a bit of theoretical knowledge. What we want to know is, why are you interested in security? Is it because you've, I don't know, seen firsthand how important security is within the tech industry? Is it because you know people who work in the field and you've heard great things about it, or specific things about it? Is it because you want to apply your theoretical knowledge from uni into practice? Like, have a good think about what it is, so that when you're asked about it, you're not having to think on the fly in the interview. Yeah, so thinking about sort of how you want to communicate that, it might be one major point, it might be a few different areas of motivation that you want to talk about. It's really good to figure that out as you're applying, so you can pop it both in your application via your like CV, or you can show it in things like passion projects, your GitHub, but you can also then talk about it in the interview when you're asked, because you will almost definitely be asked about this. And yeah, little hack for you: at Xero, we will definitely ask you about that if you apply to Xero. So another thing to think about is, will the role be something that you think that you'll genuinely want to do? If it's an internship, will it actually be a step towards where you think you'd like to go in the long term? And again, it's not that we're expecting you to know exactly what you want to do, but we do want you to be hopefully moving generally in the right direction, in terms of the career that you're looking to pursue. So your first job will not be your forever job. That is almost a certainty. People move around within the industry and outside of the industry into other areas as well, really frequently. But don't put too much pressure on yourself, but just try and have a little bit of focus when it comes to that. I think it'll go a really long way. If you find that you're struggling to figure out your motivation for a particular role, or a particular company even, I really would say, think twice about applying. This can often be the thing that actually sets you apart from other candidates when it comes to the hiring stage. Because, like I say, especially at Xero, and I'm sure it's the case with a few other companies, if we think that there's a candidate who has shown more evidence of their motivation than another candidate, we are more likely to hire that person over the person with less obvious motivation. So just have a really good think about it. Something that your parents or family will probably be horrified to hear me saying to you is go with your gut and do what you want to do, not what others have told you to do. So that's another thing to think about when you're like, why am I applying to this role? Please don't just do a job or enter an industry because you've been told, oh, you'll earn a lot of money, or it's a really reputable thing to do, or any of those kinds of things. Is it something that you're really interested in? Because if it is, you are more likely to be constantly interested in it and upskilling yourself and coming to work and being happy at work. So really have a good think about that and try and resist the urge to go for roles that others have basically told you to go for. It's your career, so ultimately it should be your choice. There are loads of people that I know, and this also includes me, to be honest, who have interviewed for and accepted roles because they were told that it was really good for their career. Just disclaimer, not this role. I love this role. just FYI, but there are, right at the start of my career, I had a pretty bumpy ride personally, and it was partly because I was doing, what my parents, with the best intentions and with love, they were encouraging me to do certain things or go for certain things that I didn't really genuinely want to do. So it didn't make me genuinely happy. And that's not the end of the world. That's just a blip. And that's okay sometimes to go through that. And you can always move job, but it can be avoided if you're able to hear and appreciate people's advice, but not necessarily listen to it. So go for what you know, or at least think is right for you. Ooh, did I just hear someone raising a hand? Did you want to unmute and ask a question, or did you want to pop it in the question?
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Awesome. So regarding this point, I've just completed university in a degree in computer science. I personally find my passion in artificial intelligence and
Mhm,
data science. However, finding most of the positions uh, that require these skills ask for a master's degree or sometimes postgraduate diploma.
mhm,
I'm currently trying to get into just any computer science related jobs until I do my master's
mhm.
in artificial intelligence, and I'm struggling to stand out or try to show interest in subjects that I'm not very interested in.
Sure.
So how can I stand out when it comes to that?
So, I mean, this is just my opinion, and thank you for the question. This is just my opinion, but the one of the ways that you can really stand out is by, if it's AI or machine learning that you're really interested in, is having projects outside of your studies, or as we call them, passion projects, and showcasing them in whatever way you think is the best way to showcase them. It might be a personal site, it might be through GitHub, it might be through something else completely, but finding ways to show, because companies want to see evidence of your curiosity, of your workings. So I would say building that out, it might take some time, but building that out. And it may well be that for data, you might need to do that master's. That might be something that is a prerequisite for a lot of employers. So not just jumping straight into the master's initially, but really working on your existing curiosity and showcasing that. That's a really great first step. Keep applying to those roles. If you are consistently hearing that you need to because getting a qualification to enter a certain field is slightly different to what I'm talking about right now. There's not there's not much that you can do to control that if there's a minimum qualification level that you need to have. So that might be something you need to go down, but before you invest your time and money in that, I would say do your best to build out like your CV and an external site or something that can be a really great way to showcase your interests and see how that goes for you. Cool. Thanks so much for the question. Okay, so moving on to doing your research, this may all sound really commonsensical. I'm aware of that, but I'm going to go through it all anyway because um, I I personally see fairly often that sometimes people don't do some of this research, and again, it's something that can really make the difference between getting the role and not getting the role. Um, so some things to do your research on are obviously the company. So not just what they do, but how they go about doing that work. So what are their values? How do they like to work? Are they agile? Are they waterfall? What's their brand reputation or brand sort of sentiment like online? There's a website called Glassdoor, which you may or may not have heard of, and that's um, basically feedback and reviews from actual employees, both current and previous, from companies. And that's a really good way to kind of gauge how people feel when they work there. And then asking yourself, do I actually vibe with all of that at a genuine level before sort of moving on to doing your research on the role or the interviewers. So with the role, often interview questions will actually be based off the job description. So that's a little recruiter hack that I'm sharing with you. I would say 9 times out of 10 interview questions are based somewhat on the job description. So study that. If it says that there'll be certain things that you're working on, or there are certain skills or interests that you need to have, make a note of those. Make sure you've thoroughly read through all of those job responsibilities. You don't, like I said earlier, you don't have to necessarily be able to do 10 out of 10 of the skills or responsibilities that they advertise, but making sure that you have examples of times where you've either done those things or have like hypothetical examples of how you would do those things will really help you when you get into the interview stage. Researching the interviewers is one that some people do, and it often stands out, especially at grad level or intern level, because not everyone does this. So this is another sort of neat trick, is if you can find out who's interviewing you, and you're generally told at least a day or two before your interview exactly who's going to be interviewing you. So um, you know most of them will be on LinkedIn generally, unless they're like a super secretive cybersecurity professional. Um, so have a look at them on LinkedIn. What are their interests? Where have they worked? Are they a subject matter expert? Um, you know, that can really help you figure out what questions to ask them in the interview, which can be really, really helpful as well. They'll be able to fully answer your question if you've actually found out about who they are as a person and what they do before you enter the interview. So like asking a senior engineer a question that's HR related, like about pay or time off or something like that, isn't going to be the best person to ask that question to. And also, if you're being interviewed by an HR person, asking them something that's really technical isn't going to be something that they can answer, and it might make the interviewer feel a bit awkward that they can't answer that. So just taking literally 5-10 minutes to look into that can pay off massively. And then obviously, I've mentioned this a couple of times already, but trying to figure out what the interview type or format is a great idea. Don't be afraid to ask the recruiter. They will not judge you for that if they haven't told you freely beforehand. It's literally their job to tell you what the interview style will be, and they'll be happy to help you. And if you ask them, exactly what can I do to prepare for this, or asking for clarification, absolutely fine. It'll save you so much time. And I know that you'll probably have quite a few interviews lined up that you'll be preparing for. So do save yourself that time if you can, because it'll help you prepare in a more efficient way as well for the interview, and you're all super busy. So yeah, be kind to yourself. And thirdly, making connections. So Summer of Tech is great for this, obviously, right? You've got meet and greet, you've got loads of different Summer of Tech events, boot camps, create camps, all of that kind of good stuff. It's a great opportunity to meet people in the industry and make connections. It can be hard, but really do try and put yourself out there. Talk to people who are in roles or in spaces that you think you might want to get into, and be real with them. Ask them what their job's like, what they did to get there, ask them for advice. You never know, they could end up playing a really big role in hiring you. Generally, the people who come to meet and greet or to expos and things like that, they do have a role in the hiring process. So, and the tech industry is really small, right? Especially in New Zealand, it's even smaller. So if you can get to know some people, it can really help you further down the line. And LinkedIn, if you don't have that set up already, get it set up. Connect with anyone and everyone that you meet with on campus, at expos, at meet and greet. And yeah, again, they might not be the person who helps you right now at this stage in your life, but they could be someone that you end up working with in the future, or that you might be able to help in the future. So it's great to start building that network out right now. And finally, and this is actually quite a big point, but do what I call a brain dump. So this is where, if I'm ever thinking of applying to a role, like when I wanted to apply to this role at Xero, I was doing pretty much the same role but at PwC beforehand. And what I did was I grabbed a piece of paper and I just chucked everything onto there, everything I'd ever done that was good, bad, in between, and that helped me prepare for my interview. Most companies will be interviewing you basically to see if you're a good fit or addition to the team and the overall company. And if a company like Xero has values or leadership principles that they kind of live and work by, really research those and have a think about how you personally align with them. So what I did, and this is just me telling you about how I did it, and you don't have to do it this way, but I basically wrote down, like I say, examples of all the great things I'd done, mistakes that I've made and learned from, tricky scenarios, times of like personal success or team successes, times of conflict as well, lots of stories basically. And these scenarios can sometimes be really hard to recall when you're in a pressured situation, like an interview or something that perceived to be a pressured situation. So writing them down in advance can just help bring them to the front of your mind a bit quicker when it comes to the interview. And once I wrote them all down, I then had to think about what those scenarios aligned with in terms of the Xero values, or how they aligned with Xero's values. Does anyone know what Xero's values are actually? Quick question for the call. If so, I'll give you a tip. Sorry, I'll give you a clue. There's 5 of them. If you know what one or all of them are, give it a shot and type it in the chat, please. It would be cool to see if anyone knows. Sherry, you should know. Sherry's on the call. Sherry was an intern at Xero last year. Yeah, human, ownership, team. Beautiful. Zane, do we get hired if we know? Great question. I'll answer that later. Teamwork. Anna, security. Not quite. Ah, go on, Sahib. Am I saying your name correctly? Is it Sahib?
Oh, sorry, I pressed that by mistake.
No worries. It's very easy to
Yeah,
press by
good.
mistake. All good.
So I can answer that. Human, ownership, beautiful, champion, and challenge.
Oh, have you got them in front of you? Be
I've
honest.
applied for it last year.
Fair enough. Awesome. Thanks so
Nice.
much. Yeah. So human, team, challenge, ownership, and beautiful. I mean, they're not in any particular order, but those are all of them in a nutshell. just going to scroll down to the bottom of the chat. True technology, yes. Okay, cool. So yeah, correct. Those are the values. And we at Xero, and this is not, by the way, a talk about Xero. I'm just using Xero as my example for most things because it just helps to bring some of my advice to life. But yeah, here's an example of a scenario that I personally might use in an interview. And there are a couple of different values that they align to. So in terms of the situation that I had, so this year there was a snap lockdown the night before the graduate induction day, which was a pretty stressful piece of news to receive at about 8 p.m. at night when I just touched down in Auckland to run the grad induction day in Auckland. So I suddenly had to change the entire plan, fly back to Wellington at about 4 a.m. the next morning, or 5 a.m., I can't remember now, and basically make the whole of induction day virtual. So what I did was I messaged my manager and we worked together to get basically a task force of colleagues across different teams on that Sunday night. We each took a task. So some people called the graduates to let them know about the new plan that we were going virtual, to stay home. One person cancelled all the catering. Another person spoke with IT to arrange couriers to deliver all the grads' laptops to their houses. So we had to get everyone's like personal addresses and everything, which is quite difficult data to get hold of if you don't have access to it for obvious reasons. And someone else had to add all the grads to Google Meet links for all the different sessions because it was a whole induction week that we'd planned that we had to completely pivot and make it virtual. But the induction, it wasn't ideal, obviously. It was all a bit crazy, at least initially, but and we couldn't meet everyone in person for a few days, which was really sad, but it was a success on the whole, and everyone was safe and sound. And luckily we work in the cloud, so grads could actually initially log on via their personal laptops until their work laptops were delivered. So this is a story that I would probably use in like a future interview. And in terms of the values that that story aligns with, what do you think it aligns with? There's a couple of values that I personally think it aligns with, but who's got some suggestions of which ones the scenario aligns with? Yeah, challenge, team. Yeah, yeah, exactly. So I personally think that it aligns with team and challenge quite strongly. Yeah, as the week went on, there was a little bit of ownership as well. Like everyone figured out certain tasks that needed to be done or changed to make it better for this like virtual style. So there was heaps of ownership as well as the week went on. Not necessarily just from me, but from everyone else who was involved in that week. So we got there. It was all fine in the end. But yeah, man, that was a stressful evening. So sometimes those examples, like where you remember it as probably quite a stressful situation, they can actually be really great examples for an interview because they can actually really showcase how you align with a company's values really well. And if you're struggling to think of things that you've done, and sometimes that can be really hard to do, you know, I'm British, so I feel very awkward blowing my own trumpet. I don't know about the rest of you, but one thing that I sometimes do as well when I'm preparing for an interview is I ask my friends or my colleagues or my family or basically anyone who knows me well to help me think of things that I've done that are awesome or that I like doing or that went wrong but I learned from, that kind of stuff. So that's another way to go about it, because sometimes they actually know you better because they're perceiving you right from outside, and they can tell you a little bit more accurately rather what you've done and how you did it. It can be quite hard to recall it yourself sometimes. Cool. So that scenario I just mentioned, and writing down scenarios, as I was just talking about, I explained that scenario using the STAR format. Can anyone tell me, again, just type it in the chat, can anyone tell me what STAR stands for? Don't be shy. Ryan is not shy. Wonderful. Nice. Situation, task, action, and result. Exactly correct. Thank you, everyone. Yeah, so in terms of STAR, as they just said in the chat, that is situation, task, action, and result. And what this is a really solid format for structuring your scenarios or your stories that you're writing about when you're preparing for interviews. It's pretty much foolproof, if I'm honest with you, especially when you're answering competency-based questions. So like I mentioned earlier, that tell me about a time where you did X, Y, Z, that kind of style of question. It's really clear, it's really easy for interviewers to understand, and it's often quite a time-efficient way to talk, which for things like summer of tech speed interviews, that's going to be really important because speed interviews are really short. They're like 10-15 minutes max. Okay, so I would really recommend you using this style of formatting your answers when you're preparing for interviews. Just remember to highlight your personal input as opposed to framing your achievements through like your team or your boss or others. Remember to not be afraid to say, I did this, or I recognize that that needed to be done, and so I did it. Sure, there would be a team involved sometimes in your answers as well, and feel free to talk about the team, but just make sure that you're getting across to the interviewer or the interviewers how you personally impacted that, because that they're looking to hire you, not your old team or your old boss, okay? Or your project team at uni or things like that. So yeah, sometimes it can feel really awkward, like I was just saying, to blow your own trumpet, but please try and allow yourself in the 10 minutes or half an hour or hour-long interview that you're preparing for to do that, just for that period of time. And it may take some practice, so really do try and lean into it, even if it's uncomfortable. Go to all the interview workshops, practice with friends or family or your career service at uni or people from Summer of Tech that you meet. It's an answer style that I personally have used in almost every single interview that I've either been in or have conducted with an interviewee. So yeah, like I say, with speed interviews, I think this would be a really good, concise but comprehensive format for you to use. Cool. Just remember, if you've got any questions about this content, do just remember to use the Q&A function, which you can find through the triangle, square, and circle button, bottom right-hand corner. You can post your question in there, and people can upvote it, and we can answer some of the most upvoted questions at the end of the session, okay? Because I just saw a question coming into the chat. Cool. So just wanted to run through some key things to do when you're preparing for a face-to-face interview, and then some key things to do when you're preparing for a virtual interview. So first we'll talk about face-to-face. If it's face-to-face, some really key things to figure out before you get there is there a dress code? And I know that sounds silly, but there are some employers who definitely do have more corporate ways of dressing. So just figure that out before you get there. And whatever they tell you, and you can email them beforehand and say, hey, what is the dress code? That's not a silly question to ask, I promise you. Mostly in the tech industry, it's pretty casual. I mean, I'm wearing like a baggy crew neck right now, and I generally wear jeans and Doc Martens to work every day, and that will be the case for many companies. But if you want to feel super comfortable on the day, then it's not a silly question to ask your recruiter. Because if you do need to turn up in, say, a dress shirt or a shift dress or whatever is appropriate for you, then it is really worth figuring that out before you turn up. Also, when you're finding that out, that'll be the kind of clothes that you'll have to wear every day to work. So you know, even if it's just an internship or it could be, you know, a permanent grad role, ask yourself, is that the kind of, you know, the uniform, so to speak, that you're comfortable and happy to wear for the next however long? Logistics. sounds really obvious, but make sure you know exactly where you need to go and exactly when you need to be there. Um, Traffic is tricky at the best of times, especially in Auckland. So make sure that you check what the traffic is like at that time of day that your interview is scheduled at. So yeah, it's there's nothing worse than the stress of thinking you had enough time and getting stuck in gross traffic, and then you're exactly on time or slightly late for the interview and you're all flustered. So making sure that you know how long it's going to get there, and then adding another 10-15 minutes onto that time so that you have complete peace of mind on your way is key. And do you know which floor you're going to go to, who you ask for when you get there? All of this stuff should be told to you by the recruiter, but if in doubt, just double check with them. Again, there's never a stupid question to ask the recruiter. That is literally their job, to help you with that kind of info. And I don't want to sound patronizing, but do try and do yourself a favor and get there just a little bit early, like 10 minutes, 15 minutes early if you can. I know a lot of you are very, very busy with uni and everything, but do try and do that. I mentioned at the start of this call that I come from a military background, and in that family, in the military, we have a motto which is rush to wait. And what that means basically is to get somewhere early so that you can then relax before the thing that you have to do or before the appointment that you have scheduled. And it used to really annoy me as a kid because my mum or my dad would, we'd even get to church on Sundays like half an hour early. Like we really rushed to wait. And we were sitting in the car park for ages. But 5-10 minutes is plenty of time to be waiting around before you get going, but it really will do wonders in terms of calming your nerves. And also that there is sometimes a little bit of faff that goes on when you first arrive to an office. So often you need to sign in, get a name badge because you'll be a visitor. So give yourself that time to sign in, maybe even go to the bathroom, grab some water or a tea, and just basically relax before you get in there. Sounds really obvious, but it is often easier said than done. So in terms of if it's virtual, you obviously won't have to figure out logistics like traffic and all that kind of stuff like you would do if it's in person, but there's still some really important things to consider when you're preparing for a virtual interview. So I don't know about you, but the last few minutes in the run up to a virtual meeting are, I'm sure some of you will agree, a time vortex. They will suddenly evaporate, and it is so easy to all of a sudden be 1, 2, 3 minutes late for a virtual meeting. So do make sure that you've taken some time to prepare your space well in advance of your virtual interview. And in terms of sort of preparing your space, what I mean by that is, have water or coffee or some kind of refreshments nearby. Interviewing is weirdly thirsty work, and make sure that you reduce your distractions. I personally like to close almost all of my tabs. I put my phone on vibrate at an absolute minimum. So if anything urgent happens, my phone is nearby, but it's not on loud. It's not going to be that distracting. And try not to have too much behind you that could create distractions for the interviewer. You might have pets, you might have flatmates, you might have family. Make sure that they all know. I know the pets won't understand, but make sure that your family and friends know that you have an interview, and that they need to just be mindful of that, stay quiet, or even if you need this, you might even ask them to be out of the house when you're doing that interview. That's something that can really help you just feel completely comfortable in your space, because you're going to be talking about yourself, right, for the whole interview, and sometimes people like to just not have any family or friends listening in. So do try and bear that in mind if that's possible for you to sort of manage or control. So yeah, pets, I know, like I just said, you can't tell them that you have an interview, but just making sure that if you've got a dog that barks loads or a cat that likes to sit on your laptop, that they're sort of kept on a leash, if you'll pardon the pun, put away for the duration of the interview. I personally quite like it when a pet sometimes pops their head into an interview and says hello, but yeah, if it's something that's going to distract you, just try and manage that too. I know I can't talk right now because my lighting is terrible because it's nighttime and I'm sitting in a fairly dark room right now. But for a virtual interview, it's often a good idea, if possible, to have some good natural lighting on your face, so not behind you, but onto your face, so that we can see you as well as possible. And hey, look, all of the preparation stuff that I've been talking you through this evening, what I like to do and what I often suggest people do, especially for virtual interviews, is to put your like little keywords or stories onto post-it notes to prompt you. Arguably, with a virtual interview, you are actually slightly at a disadvantage, right, compared to being in person, because you're not getting that natural like eye contact and body language and stuff like that. So do yourself a favor. It's not cheating. You're totally allowed to do this. Pop some keywords, facts, figures, whatever it is that's going to prompt you to remember certain scenarios or stories. Pop them onto post-its and put them around the top of your laptop or just behind your laptop or something like that on the wall. That will help you remember certain things. It will also help you look as though you're giving the interviewer eye contact, and it'll make it feel as much of a like real in-person meeting as possible, even though you're not actually in front of that person. I cannot stress this enough. Please test your internet. Please test your audio. Please test your camera. Um, it's I mean, Yekti and I had to get on this call about half an hour before we actually started the session just to check that everything was okay. And there were actually a couple of things that were not okay. Even though I personally use Google Meet every day, all day for my job, there were still a couple of things that I needed to address. So please don't assume that everything is going to be fine. I had to change my internet connection as well because I wasn't on the 5G. I was on like the basic internet connection here. So just making sure that you've got all of that linked up, that you've got your laptop plugged in. And I'm an absolute hypocrite because guess what I did not do before this session started? I did not plug my laptop in, and then I had to do that frantically towards the start of the talk. So all of those kinds of things can suddenly become an unnecessary stressor, right, in an interview. So just practice the tech with a friend or a colleague or anyone that's nearby who can just check that your microphone and camera and everything's working. So yeah, sounds really obvious, but yeah, I make those mistakes all the time, and I've been working for quite a few years now. So try and take my advice. um, do what I say, not what I do. And the last thing I would say with a virtual interview is making sure that you know how to connect to the interview. So right now, we're on Google Meet, which, like I mentioned earlier, Xero uses for their virtual interviews. But make sure that you're familiar with how to join whatever virtual interview you're joining with maybe another company. It's not always that simple. Sometimes there's a passcode. Sometimes it takes a couple of minutes to connect. Like Zoom can sometimes be a bit funny like that. So again, just trying to reduce that like unnecessary stress if you can. Yeah, it can start you off on the wrong foot in terms of feeling a bit flustered, and you definitely don't want that when you're trying to put your best foot forward and say all the right things, right? Cool. So I'll just blast through these last couple of slides with some do's and some don'ts. I'll first start with the do's. I guess the first one, when I say be kind to yourself, it's kind of what I was just saying in that previous slide. Help yourself however you can, and don't be afraid to look out for yourself during the interview process and also the planning process. So using post-its, like I said, if it's virtual, if you're going to an in-person interview, pop some of your scenarios or things you want to ask, like your questions for the interviewers, pop them onto flashcards. I know it's real old school, but if you're getting on the bus or getting an Uber or walking to the interview, having those flashcards just to remind yourself of those like key things you want to say or want to ask, that can really help just drum it in before you get there. And please try and remember and remind yourself that interviewers are not trying to catch you out. Again, I mentioned this right at the start, but I want to say it again. Like, They're not trying to catch you out. They're not trying to find ways to not hire you. It's honestly the opposite. They're trying to look for evidence to hire you. So try and remember that. They've invited you to interview for a reason. As I'm sure you're all aware, it's very competitive out there. And if you get to an interview stage, that is a good sign that they want to get to know you better. So yeah, be kind to yourself. Don't put yourself down too much. Try not to stress too much when you are preparing or entering that interview room. Okay. Answering the actual question sounds really patronizing, and apologies if it comes across that way. But what I mean by this is some candidates are clearly really, really prepared and have done all of the interview workshops. They've attended all the sessions like this, and they've taken heaps of notes. But sometimes they're so prepared that they actually end up telling the interviewer or the interviewers a story or a scenario that doesn't actually really answer the question that they've just been asked. So you can have all the amazing stories about improvements or wins or successes that you've had, but none of that actually matters if you're not answering the question that's being asked of you. So just make sure that that you really listen to the question, and you do find a scenario that fits in with that answer, but make sure that you're angling it. You're not just regurgitating your scenario, that you're angling it to the question that's being asked of you. Because if you don't do that, all it shows to the interviewer basically is that you haven't listened in that moment, which is almost definitely not your intention, and that would be a real shame. And it can happen quite easily, ironically, when you actually want the job desperately, and so you've like almost over prepared for it. So that's just one thing to bear in mind as well. I've already mentioned this, but attend all the sessions. Summer of Tech is, I cannot stress this enough, a fantastic way to get to know people in the industry, to upskill yourself, learn loads of stuff. So you have nothing to lose from going to all these sessions and doing practice interviews until you're sick of the sound of your own voice. So do all the things. You can't go wrong if you do. Be appropriate, but you. What I mean by this is like, I personally need to work somewhere where I can wear like jeans and Vans and crack the odd joke in the workplace. And I knew that Xero had a relaxed dress code. I cracked some jokes during my interview. Luckily, I was able to read the room, and the jokes that I made, they landed, thank goodness. But just make sure that if you are going to take a more relaxed approach to your interview, make sure that everything you say and do is genuine to yourself, but also PG and is safe for work, or not swearing and not being inappropriate. But yeah, do try and relax and be you, because that is who we are looking to hire. I know it can be quite challenging to do that, especially with a couple of strangers potentially sitting in front of you. And the final one here, I would say, is like making sure that you're checking in with yourself. So what I mean by that is, again, this is kind of similar to dating. How do you feel when you're talking with the interviewers? Don't just focus on whether they like you. I've already mentioned this, but I really mean it. How do you feel in front of them or around them? Do you want to work with them? Do they make you feel welcome and comfortable? The onus is not just on you to put them at ease or to impress them. And I really, really want to reiterate that multiple times, because it is honestly so important and will really, really help you in the long run to feel at home and like you belong there, if you do get the role and accept it. And now for some don'ts. The first one I've put here is, don't just look for the best priced offer. This is probably advice that not everyone will want to follow, and that's absolutely fine. But what I will say is that money and getting the best price offer is not everything. Life is too short, in my opinion, to take a job with a really big salary, but for a company or for a team, or doing a role that you actually don't really feel at home in, because ultimately you probably won't stay there that long, and you'll want to move on. So try and all jobs will be paying a decent wage. I promise you that. There's a lot of effort that goes into making sure, especially in the tech industry, that salaries are you know are really good. So make sure that you're taking the role that you actually want if it's offered to you. Don't be inappropriate, please. Here at Xero, we tend to, people do swear in the office, just like casually, that does happen. But please don't swear in interviews, even if you think that that is part of their culture. Please don't, if it's a virtual interview, please don't drink alcohol. Both of these things have happened to me in interviews. I didn't do this. Someone who I was interviewing did this, to be precise. So yeah, swearing can be sometimes a sign of nerves. And if you're someone who is sometimes a bit of a nervous swearer, again, try and get lots of interview practice in through workshops and things like that, because it really doesn't come across that well. And with drinking alcohol, it was kind of funny at the time, but also it did not land very well with some of the hiring managers who interviewed this candidate with me. So please do just drink water or tea or coffee and keep the alcohol to the evenings or the weekends, if that's okay. Thank you very much. Something else that I think is sometimes quite tempting to do, and this is often done in an attempt to impress or compliment the employer that you're trying to get a job with, is to badmouth previous employers or colleagues or uni friends or projects that you've worked on. Like, just try and not badmouth anyone else that you've ever been involved with. Even when you're talking about conflict, it doesn't really come across very well, and sometimes it can come across like you're actually not taking accountability for certain things that have happened in the past. So that can be tempting to do. Try not to do that, and try and reflect on the positives from those situations if you feel tempted to do that. And I know I can't talk because I've just been talking at you for the last hour and 7 minutes, but try not to talk too much. And one way to do that is to stick to that STAR format for good measure, that we spoke about earlier on. Talking constantly is not always communicating. So just making sure that you're answering the question, and when you feel like you've answered it, just stop and let the interviewers then jump in for the next question. Again, sounds really obvious, sounds a bit patronizing, but try not to be late. If you are late and it's for a really good reason, feel free to explain yourself, but do just try your absolute hardest to be on time. It can really reduce your chance of getting the job. Interviewers have, and that's purely because interviewers have actually less of a chance, they have less time, so less of a chance to kind of gather that important information, that important evidence as to why they should hire you compared to other candidates. But it's also just generally good etiquette to be on time. And lastly, I would say try not to overthink it all. I know you're attending this session today, you're hoping to hear all the answers. I'm just a person giving you my advice based on 5 or 6 years of working in this space. So take on board and listen to whatever it is you want to cherry pick from what I've said tonight. You don't have to take it as the gospel. Try not to overthink everything. It's easier said than done, like lots of things I've said to you this evening. But once you've done the preparation, do just try and relax and be you. Companies like Xero, for example, are not just looking to understand what you've done and what you can do. We want to know about you because that's who we're going to be hiring after all. So just try and relax into it the best you can. Okay. I think that's it. Cool. We're going to have some Q&A time now. Thanks so much for listening to me, everyone. Right, so I'm just going to plug in. I've just had to unplug my main monitor, but I'm just going to plug my main monitor back in so that I can have 2 screens, and then we'll get into some Q&A. Yekti, have you had a chance to have a look at the Q&A section yet?
Yep, there are quite a lot of them, and I've sorted them based on the most popular one for you.
Nice. Okay. Right. let me just get that up there. Lovely stuff. Okay. So, all questions, most popular first. So let me just start by saying there may be some questions that, like I said just now, I'm just a person. There may be some questions that I don't know the answers to, but I will do my absolute best and hopefully I can answer most of these. So the first question we've got here in terms of most popular is from Madison. And the question is, how much will companies prefer academic achievement over motivations or passion? That's a really great question, Madison. Thanks for that. I can only really speak for Xero and also previous employers that I've been with, and they have varied wildly when it comes to this. I would say, at Xero, if I talk about Xero right now, because they're involved in Summer of Tech, so that's probably quite helpful for you. Xero, we don't mind what your GPA is. You don't have to come from a particular degree. It's helpful if you've come from certain degrees, just in terms of the theoretical knowledge that you get from certain degrees. But you could be studying law and be coding in your spare time and be really passionate about it. And you would be, you would have just as much of a chance, arguably, of getting a role as a software engineer as someone who is studying software engineering, right? Because at Xero, we want to see that you love to learn, that you're really curious, and that you're really passionate about coding. I'm just speaking on behalf of Xero. There are some companies out there who like to see a balance of both, or who put more weight on the academic achievement. They might want you to get certain marks in certain modules, or have a minimum GPA of whatever, 6, 7. So if in doubt, I would say try and get a good balance of the two in your profile. I'm not one to talk though. My academic achievement at university was not the strongest. But yeah, if you're someone who has a solid GPA and and you're able to show some really good academic achievement, as well as your motivations and passion through like side projects or your own websites or apps or things like that, that's great. I think balance is probably a good place to start with. I don't know how helpful that was as an answer though, but thanks for the question, Madison. Cool. So next one we have here is from Omar. What is the most common mistake that students make in interviews? Interesting. I don't know if there's like a number one mistake, but there's a couple of things that I have found students do, and this isn't just students, this is people, right? They don't have to be students. This happens at all levels, because I've done some hiring in the past for more for like experienced hires as well, and they do this too. So I would say the most common mistake that people make in interviews is they talk for too long because they want to keep giving more and more detail, or they feel like talking for longer is better. That's not always the case, like I was just saying. So over talking, which ironically can sometimes make them not get the job, because the interviewer didn't have enough chance to ask them other questions. That's one thing. The other thing I would say is having pretty generic answers when it comes to their motivation. So like when let's again, I'm going to use Xero as an example, saying, oh, why do you want to work at Xero? And people say, oh, it's a really fast growing company and it's really well known in Wellington, which is a pretty basic answer. That doesn't really tell us anything about you, doesn't really tell us why you're applying to the role. So no kind of focused motivation is probably another one. And I appreciate that that's really challenging sometimes to figure out or to focus in on when you're applying to so many different roles at so many different companies, and every company wants you to tell them that they're the only company you've ever looked at in your entire life, and that is not the truth. We all know that. But yeah, I would say that those are like the two main things. And this isn't a mistake, but I think interviews have a really bad rep, right, of being this like super stressful situation where you must perform and you will be grilled. And essentially what it is a few humans talking to each other. But because there's like this contractually binding thing that's potentially at the end of it, a job, it's this terrifying thing. But if you just step back and sort of, I don't know, I'm a bit of a cosmic nihilist at times. Sometimes I step back and I'm like, this is just a conversation between people. So trying to remember that so that you don't go in as a complete nervous wreck. And again, that's not a student thing. That's just that's a people thing. And I can sometimes be like that, especially when I really, really want the job. So yeah, trying to bear that in mind too. Quite a long-winded answer, Omar, especially when I just said one thing people do too much is talk for ages. So the irony is not lost on me. Thanks for that question, Omar. I hope that helps. Right, we've got one from Zane. Let's have a look. Oh, thanks, Omar. So Zane is asking, not everyone codes as a hobby. How much does not having a stocked GitHub hurt me as an applicant? And what can I do if I don't have the time between now and the interview stage to beef up my GitHub if needed? Great question, Zane. GitHub isn't the be all and end all, not obviously, honestly. There are various different ways that you can showcase that you are passionate about coding. It could even be that you want to explain in your CV that you don't have a lot of time to code as a hobby, or you would love to do more of it, but you can't because you've got a part-time job or two part-time jobs, as well as all the stuff that you will do at uni. So maybe taking some time to explain that is quite a good idea on your application, on your cover letter or your CV. The other thing is it doesn't have to be on GitHub. It can be on any platform. So if there are other things, and it doesn't have to just be coding. So, God, I sound like a broken record. At Xero, we love to see that you're curious in general, and it doesn't necessarily have to be just coding that you're interested in. Sometimes it happens to be that people just show us their coding, but if you've got other hobbies and things that you spend a lot of your time doing, if it's like volunteering or if you're really sporty or whatever it is, we want to see that. Or if you're upskilling in something else, like you're learning a language, like as in a linguistic, spoken language, tell us about that. It doesn't all have to just be about coding. So yeah, try not to worry too much about it. It's one of many things that we look at in a pretty sort of multifaceted overall application. Yeah, it's not the be all and end all. It does help though, I'm not going to lie, it does help. Right, who have we got next? I'm just going to rejig these because I think people have been upvoting as I've been talking. Okay, so there's one here from, I think it's Joanne. Apologies, am I saying your name correctly? I hope so. Perfect, wonderful, thanks for that. So their question is, for star situations, how up to date must the situations be? For example, would an experience 5 years ago still be relevant today? Hey, yeah, of course it would be. It happened to you. That's enough, that's valid. You might want to preface the example by saying, this happened a while ago. This was when I was in this situation. But any experience is relevant experience, right? If you think that that's the question, if you think that is the scenario, sorry, that is going to answer the question properly, that's the best scenario, the best situation to talk about, 100%. Okay, hope that helps. So I've got a question here from Paula. Paula or Paula? And the question is, what can you say about body language during an interview? Ooh, this is a spicy question. There are so many different opinions on this. I personally, this is again just my personal opinion, I am a bit of a mimic, and I subconsciously do that to make the other person feel confident, not to not to like a ridiculous extent. But I tend to find that if someone sitting opposite me is sitting with their legs crossed and they're like kind of leaning casually on the desk, I find myself doing that with them and kind of mirroring them. And that in turn can make that person feel at ease. And there's a lot of psychological research into reflecting body language and it being well received by the other person. There's also a lot of research into power posing, which I'm not suggesting you do in these interviews, like just suddenly standing up and putting both hands on the desk and all that kind of stuff. But I would say quite a relaxed sitting style is a good place to start. If you're someone who's more comfortable sitting with your legs uncrossed than crossed, or vice versa, go for that. Be comfortable is the main thing. When you're sitting at your desk, whether it's at uni or at work or wherever it is, how do you think best? That'll be the thing to really think about when you're interviewing. You know, what's gonna help you get oxygen to your brain and words out of your mouth. But yeah, a little bit of mimicry can sometimes help to just make the atmosphere a little bit relaxed. But I don't want you to I don't want that to be another thing that you're thinking about, right? When you're in the interview, like, oh, they've just crossed their arms. Okay, now I'll cross my arms. But yeah, it's something that I've become aware of, not necessarily in interviews, but in meetings as my career has gone on. That people, everyone will sit down initially, and they'll all be sitting differently. And then as the meeting goes on, people tend to like start having quite similar body language, depending on how the meeting goes. If it becomes a pretty big and important meeting, they might all just do whatever they want. But if it's like a pretty relaxed vibe in there, people tend to like mirror each other a little bit. It's quite interesting to watch. But that's me having studied like workspace psychology. So the main thing I would say for interviews is, like I said before, sit in a position that will help you. You know, if it's sitting up really straight, getting oxygen to your brain and words out of your mouth is the main thing. Thanks, Jessica. Take care. Cool. I've answered that one. How much time do I have, Yekti? It's 7:30 now. Oh no.
I think
Should I answer
one
2 more
or more
questions or something?
questions.
One
Yeah,
more?
yeah, 1 or 2, and then we can record the rest, and then you can answer it at a later time on Slack.
Okay.
Mm.
All right. The next most popular question is from Suram, which is, how long can you take to start answering a scenario-based question to think over the best scenario that aligns with the question? This is a great question from Suram. Thank you for this. All the others were great questions as well. Just saying, this one is something that I didn't cover, which would have been really helpful for me to cover. Don't be afraid. I know speed interviews will be quite like quick and fast, but don't be afraid to ask for a moment. Just say, I just need to think for a second, because it may be that you're tossing up between 2 different or even 3 different scenarios in your head. So just verbalizing that to the interviewer so that they know that you're having a think. And say, look, I've got a couple of scenarios in my head. I'm just figuring out which one's the best one for this answer. That can go a long way. So don't be afraid to say that. They won't dock you any marks or anything for that. Well, at least I wouldn't. So do say that. But this is also partly why the preparation bit is really important, because it will reduce that think time down, which will really help you in specifically the speed interviews, which will be short and fast, and it will hopefully reduce the stress for you and reduce the time that it takes for you to recall certain scenarios. Hope that helps you as well, Suram. But yeah, if in doubt, just ask or tell them. Don't be afraid to do that. You're a human being. Tell them the things. Cool. Okay, well, thank you to everyone else who asked questions. Sorry I can't get through all of them, but because we've recorded this meeting, it'll also pull through the Q&A that's come through. So we will get through answering those questions for you, just not right now, but in due course. So yeah, thank you all for attending tonight. Thank you also to Yekti and the amazing Summer of Tech Wranglers like Melissa and Bea. You're always here, always helping me out. It's awesome. And I've seen loads of familiar faces and names on the call as well tonight from people I've met on campus or who've applied to roles. So thank you all so much. The recording will be available soon if you want to watch it again and again to your heart's content. And hopefully I will see some of you at meet and greet in a month or so. Take care. Have a great evening.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Alice.
No worries. Thank you.
Don't forget to fill out the feedback form, guys and girls. Sorry, that's not very inclusive. People.
Everyone, yeah. Thank you, everyone. Take care. Bye.
Good evening. Bye.